Themes in World History, Textbook in History for Class 11. Theme 1, From the Beginning of Time. This chapter traces the beginning of human existence. It was 5.6 million years ago that the first human-like creatures appeared on the Earth's surface. After this, several forms of humans emerged and then became extinct. Human beings resembling us, henceforth referred to as modern humans, originated about 160,000 years ago. During this long period of human history, people obtained food by either scavenging or hunting animals and gathering plant produce. They also learned how to make stone tools and to communicate with each other. Although other ways of obtaining food were adopted later, hunting gathering continued. Even today, there are hunter gatherer societies in some parts of the world. This makes us wonder whether the lifestyles of present day hunter gatherers can tell us anything about the past. Discoveries of human fossils, stone tools, and cave paintings help us to understand early human history. Each of these discoveries has a history of its own. Very often, when such finds were first made, most scholars refused to accept that these fossils were the remains of early humans. They were also skeptical about the ability of early humans to make stone tools or paint. It was only over a period of time that the true significance of these finds were realized. The evidence for human evolution comes from fossils of species of humans which have become extinct. Fossils can be dated either through direct chemical analysis or indirectly by dating the sediments in which they are buried. Once fossils are dated, a sequence of human evolution can be worked out. When such discoveries were first made, about 200 years ago, many scholars were often reluctant to accept that fossils and other finds, including stone tools and paintings, were actually connected with early forms of humans. This reluctance generally stemmed from their belief in the Old Testament of the Bible, according to which human origin was regarded as an act of creation by God. For instance, in August 1856, workmen who were quarrying for limestone in the Neander Valley, a gorge near the German city of Dusseldorf, found a skull and some skeletal fragments. These were handed over to Carl Ferlot, a local schoolmaster and natural historian, who realized that they did not belong to a modern human. He then made a plaster cast of the skull and sent to Hermann Schaffhausen, a professor of anatomy at Bonn University. The following year, they jointly published a paper claiming that the skull represented a form of human that was extinct. At that time, scholars did not accept this view and instead declared that the skull belonged to a person of more recent times. 24th November 1859, when Charles Darwin on the Origin of Species was published, marked a landmark in the study of evolution. All 1,250 copies of the first print were sold out on the same day. Darwin argued that humans had evolved from animals a long time ago. It is possible to trace these developments back to between 36 and 24 million years ago. We sometimes find it difficult to conceptualize such long spans of time. If you consider a page of your book to represent 10,000 years, in itself a vast span of time, 10 pages would represent 100,000 years, and 100 pages would be equal to 1 million years. To think of 36 million years, you would have to imagine a book 3,600 pages long. That was when primates, a category of mammals, emerged in Asia and Africa. Subsequently, by about 24 million years ago, there emerged a subgroup amongst primates called hominoids. This included apes, and much later, about 5.6 million years ago, we find evidence of the first hominids. While hominids have evolved from hominoids and share certain common features, there are major differences as well. Hominoids have a smaller brain than hominids. They are quadrupeds, walking on all fours but with flexible forelimbs. Hominids, by contrast, have an upright posture and bipedal locomotion. There are also marked differences in the hand, which enables the making and use of tools. We will examine the kinds of tools made and their significance more closely later. Two lines of evidence suggest an African origin for hominids. First, it is the group of African apes that are most closely related to hominids. Second, the earliest hominid fossils, which belong to the genus Aus- Australopithecus, have been found in East Africa and date to about 5.6 million years ago. In contrast, fossils found outside Africa are no older than 1.8 million years. Hominids belong to a family known as Hominidae, which includes all forms of human beings. The distinctive characteristics of hominids include a large brain size, upright posture, bipedal locomotion, and specialization of the hand. Hominids are further subdivided into branches known as genus, of which Australopithecus and Homo are important. Each of these in turn include several species. The major differences between Australopithecus and Homo relate to brain size, jaws, and teeth. The former has a smaller brain size, heavier jaws, and larger teeth than the latter. Virtually all the names given by scientists to species are derived from Latin and Greek words. For instance, the name Australopithecus comes from the Latin word austral, meaning southern, and a Greek word pithekos, meaning ape. The name was given because this earliest form of humans still retained many features of an ape, such as relatively smaller brain size in comparison to Homo, large back teeth, and limited dexterity of the hands. Upright walking was also restricted as they still spent a lot of time on trees. They retained characteristics such as long forelimbs, curved hands, and foot bones, and mobile ankle joints suited to life on trees. Over time, as tool making and long distance walking increased, many humans' characteristics also developed. The remains of early humans have been classified into different species. They are often distinguished from one another on the basis of difference in bone structure. For instance, species of early humans are differentiated in terms of their skull size and distinctive jaws. These characteristics may have evolved due to what has been called the positive feedback mechanism. For example, bipedalism enabled hands to be freed for carrying infants or objects. In turn, as hands were used more and more, upright walking gradually became more efficient. Apart from the advantage of freeing hands for various uses, far less energy is consumed while walking as compared to the movement of a quadruped. However, the advantage in terms of saving energy is reversed while running. There is indirect evidence of bipedalism as early as 3.6 million years ago. This comes from the fossilized hominid footprints in Liatuli, Tanzania. Fossil fuels or fossil limb bones recovered from Hadar, Ethiopia, provide more direct evidence of bipedalism. Around 2.5 million years ago, with the onset of a phase of glaciation or an ice age, when large parts of the earth were covered with snow, there were major changes in climate and vegetation. Due to the reduction in temperatures as well as rainfall, grassland areas expanded at the expense of forests, leading to the gradual extinction of the early forms of Australopithecus that were adapted to forests and the replacement by species that were better adapted to the drier seasons. Among these were the earliest representatives of the genus Homo. Homo is a Latin word meaning man, although there were women as well. Scientists distinguish among several types of Homo. The names assigned to these species are derived from what are regarded to their typical characteristics. So fossils are classified as Homo habilis, the tool maker, Homo erectus, the upright man, and Homo sapiens, the wise or thinking man. Fossils of Homo habilis have been discovered at Omo in Ethiopia and Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. The earliest fossils of Homo erectus have been found both in Africa and Asia. Kubifora and West Turkana, Kenya, Mojokerto, and Sangiran, Java. As the finds in Asia belong to a later date than those in Africa, it is likely that hominids migrated from East Africa to southern and northern Africa, to southern and northeastern Asia, and perhaps to Europe, sometimes between 2 and 1.5 million years ago. This species survived for nearly a million years. In some instances, the names of fossils are derived from the places where the first fossils of a particular type were found. So, fossils found in Heidelberg, a city in Germany, were called Homo heidelbergensis, while those found in the Neander Valley were categorized as Homo neanderthalensis. The earliest fossils from Europe are of Homo heidelbergensis and Homo neanderthalensis. Both belong to the species of archaic Homo sapiens. The fossils of Homo heidelbergensis have a wide distribution, having been found in Africa, Asia, and Europe. The Neanderthals occupied Europe and Western and Central Asia from roughly 113,000 years ago to 35,000 years ago. They disappeared abruptly in Western Europe around 35,000 years ago. In general, compared to Australopithecus, Homo have a larger brain, jaws with a reduced outward protrusion, and smaller teeth. An increase in brain size is associated with more intelligence and better memory. The changes in the jaws and teeth were probably related to the differences in dietary habits. The story of human evolution, modern human beings. If you look at the chart, you will notice the some of that earliest evidence of Homo sapiens have been found in different parts of Africa. This raises the question of the center of human origin. Was there a single center or were there several? The issue of the place of origin of modern humans have been much debated. Two total divergent views have been expounded, one advocating the regional continuity model with multiple regions of origin, the other the replacement model with a single origin in Africa. According to the regional continuity model, the archaic Homo sapiens in different regions gradually evolved at different rates into modern humans, and hence the variation in the first appearance of modern humans in different parts of the world. The argument is based on the regional differences in the features of present day humans. According to those who advocate this view, these dissimilarities are due to differences between the pre existing Homo erectus and Homo heidelbergensis population that occupied the same regions. The discovery of Australopithecus Olduvai Gorge, 17 July 1959. The Olduvai Gorge was first discovered in the early 20th century by a German butterfly collector. However, Olduvai has come to be identified with Mary and Louis Leakey, who worked here for over 40 years. It was Mary Leakey who directed archaeological excavations at Olduvai and Liatuli, and she made some of the most exciting discoveries. This is what Louis Leakey wrote about one of their most remarkable finds. That morning I woke up with a headache and a slight fever. Reluctantly, I agreed to spend a day in a camp. With one of us out of commission, it was even more vital for the other to continue the work, for our precarious 7-week season was running out. So Mary departed for the diggings with Sally and Toots, two of their dogs, in the Land Rover, a jeep-like vehicle, and I settled back to a restless day off. Some time later, perhaps I dozed off, I heard the Land Rover coming up fast to camp. I had a momentary vision of Mary stung by one of our hundreds of resident scorpions or bitten by a snake that had slipped past the dogs. The Land Rover rattled to a stop, and I heard Mary's voice calling over and over, "I've got him, I've got him, I've got him." Still groggy from the headache, I couldn't make her out. "Got what? Are you hurt?" I asked. "Him, the man, our man," Mary said. "The one we've been looking for 23 years. Come, quick, I found his teeth." From Finding the World's Earliest Man by L.S.B. Leakey, National Geographic, 118 September 1960. The Replacement and Regional Continuity Models. The replacement model visualizes the complete replacement everywhere of all older forms of humans with modern humans. In support of this view is the evidence of genetic and anatomical homogeneity of modern humans. Those who suggest this argue that the enormous similarity amongst modern humans is due to their descent from a population that originated in a single region, which is Africa. The evidence of earliest fossils of modern humans also supports the replacement model. Scholars who hold this view suggest that physical differences observed today among modern humans are the result of adaptation over a span of thousands of years by populations who migrated to the particular regions where they finally settled down. Early humans, ways of obtaining food. So far, we have been considering the evidence of skeletal remains and seeing how these have been used to reconstruct the histories of movement of peoples across continents, but there are other, more routine aspects of human life as well. Let us see how these can be studied. Early humans would have obtained food through a number of ways, such as gathering, hunting, scavenging, and fishing. Gathering would involve collecting plant foods such as seeds, nuts, berries, fruits, and tubers. That gathering was practiced is generally assumed rather than conclusively established, as there is very little direct evidence for it. While we get a fair amount of fossil bones, fossilized plant remains are relatively rare. The only other way of getting information about plant intake would be if plant remains were accidentally burned. This process results in carbonization. In this form, organic matter is preserved for a long span of time. However, so far archaeologists have not found much evidence of carbonized seeds for this very early period. In recent times, the term hunting has been under discussion by scholars. Increasingly, it is being suggested that the early hominids scavenged or foraged for meat and marrow from the carcasses of animals that had died naturally or had been killed by other predators. It is equally possible that small mammals such as rodents, birds, reptiles, and even insects were eaten by early hominids. Hunting probably began later, about 500,000 years ago. The earliest clear evidence of the deliberate planned hunting and butchery of large mammals comes from two sites: Boxgrove in southern England 500,000 years ago and Schöningen in Germany 400,000 years ago. Fishing was also important, as is evident from the discovery of fish bones at different sites. From about 35,000 years ago, there is evidence of planned hunting from some European sites. Some sites, such as Dolny Vestunis, which was near a river, seem to have been deliberately chosen by early people. Herds of migratory animals, such as reindeer and horse, probably crossed the river during their autumn and spring migration and were killed on a large scale. The choice of such sites indicate that people knew about the movement of these animals and also about the means of killing large numbers of animals quickly. Did men and women have different roles in gathering, scavenging, hunting, and fishing? We do not really know. Today we find societies that live by hunting and gathering, where women and men undertake a range of different activities, but as we will see in later in the chapter, it is not possible to suggest parallels with the past. Early humans from trees to caves and open air sites. We are on a surer ground when we try to reconstruct evidence for patterns of residence. One way of doing this is by plotting the distribution of artifacts. For example, thousands of lake tools and hand axes have been excavated at Kilombe and Olorgesailie, Kenya. These finds are dated between 700,000 years and 500,000 years ago. How did these tools accumulate in one place? It is possible that some place where food resources are abundant were visited repeatedly. In such areas, people would tend to leave behind traces of their activities and presence, including artifacts. The deposited artifacts would appear as patches on the landscape. The places that were less frequently visited would have fewer artifacts, which may have been scattered over the surface. It is almost important to remember that the same locations could have been shared by hominids, other primates, and carnivores. Look, between 400,000 years and 125,000 years, caves and open air sites began to be used. Evidence for this comes from sites in Europe. In the Lazaret cave in southern France, a 12 into 4-meter shelter was built against the cave wall. Inside it were two hearths and evidence of different food sources: fruits, vegetables, seeds, nuts, bird eggs, and freshwater fish. At another site, Terra Amata on the coast of southern France, flimsy shelters with roofs of wood and grasses were built for short term seasonal visits. Pieces of baked clay and burnt bone, along with the stone tools dated between 1.4 and 1 million years ago, have been found at Chiso Wanja, Kenya, Swartkrans, South Africa. Were these the result of a natural bushfire or volcanic eruption, or were they produced through the deliberate controlled use of fire? We do not really know. Herds, on the other hand, are indications of the controlled use of fire. This had several advantages. Fire provided warmth and light inside caves and could be used for cooking. Besides, fire was used to harden wood, as for instance the tip of the spear. The use of heat also facilitated the flaking of tools, as important fire could be used to scare away dangerous animals. Early humans making tools. To start with, it is useful to remember that the use of tools and tool making are not confined to humans. Birds are known to make objects to assist them with feeding, hygiene, and social encounters, and while foraging for food, some chimpanzees use tools that they have made. However, there are some features of human tool making that are not known among apes. As we have seen, certain anatomical and neurological adaptations have led to the skilled use of hands, probably due to the important role of tools in human lives. Moreover, the ways in which humans use and make tools often require greater memory and complex organizational skills, both of which are absent in apes. The earliest evidence for the making and use of stone tools comes from sites in Ethiopia and Kenya. It is likely that the earliest stone tools makers were the Australopithecus. As in the case of other activities, we do not know whether tool making was done by men or women or both. It is possible that stone tool makers were both women and men. Women in particular may have made and used tools to obtain food for themselves as well as to sustain their children after weaning. After 35,000 years ago, improvements in the techniques for killing animals are evident from the appearance of new kinds of tools such as spear throwers and the bow and arrow. The meat thus obtained was probably processed by removing the bones, followed by drying, smoking, and storage. Thus, food could be stored for later consumption. There were other changes such as trapping of fur-bearing animals. The earliest evidence of sewn clothing comes from about 21,000 years ago. Besides, with the introduction of the punch blade technique to make small chisel like tools, it was now possible to make engravings on bone, antler, ivory, or wood. Modes of communication, language, and art. Among living beings, it is humans alone that have a language. There are several views on language development. 1. That hominid language involved gestures or hand movements. 2. That spoken language was preceded by vocal but non-verbal communication such as singing or humming. 3. That human speech probably began with calls like the tones that have been observed amongst primates. Humans may have possessed a smaller number of speech sounds in the initial stage. Gradually, they may have developed into language. When that spoken language emerged, it has been suggested that the brains of Homo habilis had certain features which would have made it possible for them to speak. Thus, language may have developed as early as 2 millennia ago. The evolution of the vocal tract was equally important. This occurred around 200,000 years ago. It is more specifically associated with modern humans. A third suggestion is that language developed around the same time as art, that is, around 40,000 to 35,000 years ago. The development of spoken language has been seen as closely connected with art, since both are media for communication. Cave paintings at Altamira. Altamira is a cave site in Spain. The paintings on the ceilings of the cave were first brought to the attention of Marcelino Sanz de Sautuola, a local landowner and amateur archaeologist, by his daughter Maria in November 1879. The little girl was running about in the cavern and playing about here and there, while her father was digging the floor of the cave. Suddenly she noticed the paintings on the ceiling. Look, Papa, oxen. At first her father just laughed, but soon realized that some sort of paste rather than paint had been used for the paintings and became so enthusiastic that he could hardly speak. He published a booklet the following year, but for almost 2 decades his findings were dismissed by European archaeologists on the ground that these were too good to be ancient. Hundreds of paintings of animals done between 30,000 and 12,000 years ago have been discovered in the caves of Lascaux and Chauvet, both in France and Altamira in Spain. These include depictions of bison, horses, ibex, deer, mammoths, rhinos, lions, bears, panthers, hyenas, and owls. More questions have been raised than answered regarding these paintings. For example, why do some areas of caves have paintings and not others? Why were some animals painted and not the others? Why were men painted both individually and in groups, whereas women were depicted only in groups? Why were men painted near animals but never women? Why were groups of animals painted in the sections of caves where sounds carried well? Several explanations have been offered. One is that because of importance of hunting, the paintings of animals were associated with ritual and magic. The act of painting could have been a ritual to ensure a successful hunt. Another explanation offered is that these caves were possibly meeting places for small group of people or locations for group activities. These groups could share hunting techniques and knowledge, while paintings and engravings served as the media for passing information from one generation to the next. The above account of early societies have been based on archaeological evidence. Clearly, there is much that we still do not know. As mentioned at the beginning of this chapter, hunter gatherer societies exist even today. Can one learn anything about the past societies from the present day hunter gatherers? This is a question we will address in the next section. Early encounters with hunter gatherers in Africa. The following is an account by a member of an African pastoral group about its initial contact in 1870 with the Kung Sant, a hunter gatherer society living in Kalahari's desert. When we first came into this area, all we saw were strange footprints in the sand. We wondered what kind of people these were. They were very afraid of us and would hide whenever we came around. We found their villages, but they were always empty because as soon as they saw strangers coming, they would scatter and hide in the bush. We said, "Oh, this is good. These people are afraid of us. They are weak and we can easily rule over them." So we just ruled them. There was no killing or fighting. The Hadza. The Hadza are a small group of hunters and gatherers living in the vicinity of Lake Eyasi, a salt Rift Valley lake. The country of eastern Hadza, dry rocky savanna dominated by thorn scrub and acacia trees, is rich in wild foods. Animals are exceptionally numerous and were certainly commoner at the beginning of the century. Elephant, rhinoceros, buffalo, giraffe, zebra, waterbuck, gazelle, warthog, baboon, lion, leopard, and hyena are all common, as are smaller animals such as porcupine, hare, jackal, tortoise, and many others. All of these animals, apart from the elephant, are hunted and eaten by the Hadza. The amount of meat that could be regularly eaten without endangering the future of the game is probably greater than anywhere else in the world where hunters and gatherers live or have lived in the recent past. Vegetable food, roots, berries, the fruit of the baobab tree, etc., though not often obvious to the casual observer, is always abundant even at the height of the dry season in a year of drought. The type of vegetable food available is different in the 6 month wet season from the dry season, but there is no period of shortage. The honey and grubs of 7 species of wild bee are eaten. Supplies of these vary from season to season and from year to year. Sources of water are widely distributed over the country in the wet season but are very few in the dry season. The Hadza consider that about 5 to 6 kilometers is the maximum distance over which water can reasonably be carried, and camps are normally sited within a kilometer of a watercourse. Part of the country consists of open grasslands, but the Hadza never built camps there. Camps are invariably sited among trees and rocks, and by preference among both. The Eastern Hadza assert no rights over land and its resources. Any individual may live wherever he likes and may hunt animals, collect roots, berries, and honey, and draw water anywhere in Hadza country without any sort of restriction. In spite of the exceptional numbers of game animals in their area, the Hadza rely mainly on wild vegetable matter for their food. Probably as much as 80% of their food by weight is vegetable, while meat and honey together account for the remaining 20%. Camps are commonly small and widely dispersed in the wet season, large and concentrated near the few available sources of water in the dry season. There is never any shortage of food, even in the time of drought. Written in 1960 by James Woodburn, an anthropologist. Hunter-gatherer societies from the present to the past. As our knowledge of present-day hunter-gatherers increased through studies by anthropologists, a question that began to be posed was whether the information about living hunters and gatherers could be used to understand past societies. Currently, there are two opposing views on this issue. On one side are scholars who have directly applied specific data from present day hunter gatherer societies to interpret the archaeological remains of the past. For example, some archaeologists have suggested that the hominid sites dated to 2 million years ago along the margins of Lake Turkana could have been dry season camps of early humans, because such a practice has been observed among the Hadza and the Kung San. On the other side are scholars who feel that ethnographic data cannot be used for understanding past societies, as the two are totally different. For instance, present day hunter gatherer societies pursue several other economic activities along with hunting and gathering. These include engaging in exchange and trade in minor forest produce or working as paid laborers in the fields of neighboring farmers. Moreover, these societies are totally marginalized in all senses, geographically, politically, and socially. The conditions in which they live are very different from those of early humans. Another problem is that there is tremendous variations amongst living hunter-gatherer societies. There are conflicting data on many issues such as the relative importance of hunting and gathering, group sizes, or the movement from place to place. Also, there is little consensus regarding the division of labor in food procurement. Although today generally women gather and men hunt, there are societies where both women and men hunt and gather and make tools. In any case, the important role of women in contributing to the food supply in such societies cannot be denied. It is perhaps this factor that ensures a relatively equal role for both women and men in present day hunter gatherer societies, although there are variations. While this may be the case today, it is difficult to make any such inference for the past. Epilogue. For several million years, humans lived by hunting wild animals and gathering wild plants. Then, between 10,000 and 4,500 years ago, people in different parts of the world learned to domesticate certain plants and animals. This led to the development of farming and pastoralism as a way of life. The shift from foraging to farming was a major turning point in human history. Why did this change take place at this point of time? The last ice age came to an end about 13 years ago, and with that, warmer, wetter seasons conditions prevailed. As a result, conditions were favorable for the growth of grasses such as wild barley and wheat. At the same time, as open forests and grasslands expanded, the population of certain animal species, such as wild sheep, goat, cattle, pig, and donkey, increased. What we find is that human societies began to gradually prefer areas that had abundance of wild grasses and animals. Now, relatively large permanent communities occupied such areas for most parts of the year. With some areas being clearly preferred, a pressure may have built up to increase the food supply. This may have triggered the process of domestication of certain plants and animals. It is likely that a combination of factors, which included climatic change, population pressure, a greater reliance on and knowledge of a few species of plants and animals, played a role in this transformation. One such area where farming and pastoralism began around 10,000 years ago were the Fertile Crescent, extending from the Mediterranean coast to the Zagros Mountains in Iran. With the introduction of agriculture, more people began to stay in one place or for even longer periods than they had done before. Thus, permanent houses began to be built of mud bricks, and even stone. These are some of the earliest villages known to archaeologists. Farming and pastoralism led to the introduction of many other changes, such as the making of pots in which to store grain and other produce, and to cook food. Besides, new kinds of stone tools came into use. Other new tools, such as the plough, were used in agriculture. Gradually, people became familiar with metals such as copper and tin. The wheel, important for both pot making and transportation, came into use. About 5,000 years ago, even larger concentrations of people began to live together in cities. Why did this happen? And what are the differences between cities and other settlements? Look out for answers to these and other questions in Theme 2.